Hi, Barbara. I'm so glad to have you on our live. It's actually not live, but getting recorded, and because of technical issues. But I'm glad we'll be able to share this in my group. And I'm just so looking forward chatting to you about stress and time management and sleep. But I'd love to know you a bit more. I know that you've been for over 20 years, you worked in industries like film, hospitality, management, and where you grown in your expertise, how to manage time, how to manage stress. And always when I hear you or read your blogs, I think, oh, that's a good tip to try. Last one I tried about the email. So that's what I found really helpful. So tell us a bit about yourself and how did you start working in stress and time management?
Thanks, Lana. It's a interesting story, I guess. I actually worked in the film, as you mentioned. I worked in film and television. I worked in hospitality. I worked in marketing, and I got to a point in my life where I was doing a lot of personal development, personal growth, and I recognized that the film industry was not. It no longer aligned with who I was and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to be doing in my life. And during that time of doing personal development, I did a lot of work establishing what it was that I placed value on in my life. What were my beliefs, my personality traits? What are my innate abilities and gifts? And through that process, I established that one of those highest value points was being organized and making sense of things and making order out of chaos. And at the time, I was just, once I'd given up on the film industry, I was just plodding along, working and using my skills in different industries, but not really embarking on anything bold and ambitious. And I had heard a speaker talking about building a business around what you love. And when you do that, and when you really do what you love and what you're born to do, then things just fall into place. And so I was asking this coach at the time, okay, I like organizing things. How on earth do I build a business around that? And bit by bit, I did. So I looked at I had never heard of professional organizers before. So I kind of embarked upon that, but I recognized that it was less about organizing space and it was more about organizing time and getting yourself organized and the personal ability to prioritize, not to procrastinate, to find systems and processes to be more personally organized. So I pursued that and things did really start to fall into place very quickly for me. But through that process, very early on, within a couple of years of starting my business, I recognized that a common thread for a lot of people I was working with was stress. For a lot of people, they couldn't start to approach their time management until they had dealt with their stress. And I discovered that stress and time management very much go hand in hand. When you're stressed, you can't manage your time. And when you can't manage your time, you become stressed. So it's not uncommon for me to take one or other approach when I'm working with people now. So that's how I got to this place.
Amazing. Yeah. You mentioned about that stress and time management. It just kind of goes hand in hand sometimes. And what do you find it's more that women need to address more, managing their time or stress? Or how would you work with someone who could have a lot of stress and issues with managing their time?
Like which ones are you saying, which one's more important? Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking me?
Or
Or
how
how do
would
you
you
manage both?
start with, how would you start working with someone who is dealing,
Got it. Yeah. So one of the first things that I do is, it sounds a little flaky, but it's about stopping and pulling back and practicing some mindfulness techniques, which is really about mapping out where things are at rather than just going headfirst and diving in, trying to resolve the problems, is actually stopping and identifying what's the status of things, what's the focus, where are things are positioned in my world, and what's the approach that I need to take. And that's probably the first thing that I do is let's just stop and take stock. Yeah, let's look at the status of things. And just in doing that is immensely useful to be able to go to work out what's important, or what's in the big scheme, in the big picture, what's important and where does the focus need to be. And then the other thing is then looking at what are the trigger points, what is triggering certain situations that are overwhelming, that are stressful, that are frustrating, that misalign you, or put you in a dangerous or awkward situation. What are those trigger points, when and where do they occur? So that's how I would start normally working with people.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because it just reminds me so much as well when I work with women and dealing with sleep and anxiety. Quite often you have to also realize what it's usually goes hand in hand, and sometimes if you don't deal with one, then you're struggling with the other. If you don't deal with anxiety, then you can't sleep, and if you don't sleep, then you get worse anxiety. So it's always like, let's stop and see what is causing anxiety, and then how we deal with both, and sleep and anxiety. So it just reminds me so much, like with the time and stress, managing them both, but also kind of pulling back and just thinking what's actually going on here, why is it happening. That's really good questions to ask when dealing with that. I also saw on your website a really funny moment when you had with your children, when you in public, when you almost burst into tears because you just couldn't manage them, and it was just such an embarrassing moment, and you thought, what's going on? Can you tell us a bit more about that moment?
Sure. It was the moment, I guess, when everything came to a head. And so it's like juggling when you've got all these balls in the air, and then you throw another one into the mix, and then you throw another one, and suddenly you're trying to keep all your eyes on all these balls that you're juggling, and it just takes one to drop, and then you go and let the whole bundle go. That's what it feels like. So for me at that time, I was working for an entrepreneur, and I was really busy, and he would try and always push to get the most out of me, which was challenging but also rewarding, but really stressful. My kids were really little. We were on a really low income, so everything was always to a budget. So I was only working part-time. My husband was on a low income at the time. So that just put it stressed on us as well. So we had financial stress, we had work stress. I was also little children, and so we couldn't afford to have mishaps that were going to cost us money, like being late on bills or overspending on things, any of those things. So that also added that stress. I was trying to start a business, and at the time, or deciding what I was doing, and doing lots of training and development around what it was I was going to do. And I was also the CEO of the household, so to speak. So I'd manage the finances, I'd manage the budget, I'd organize all the insurances and get everything organized for the family. At that time, I really felt my family were telling me that I was stressed, and I was saying, no, I'm fine. I'm not burnt out. I'm not falling in a heap. But work was getting the best of me, and my family were getting the worst of me. And they called me Hurricane Mum, because I would come home and I would just be so wound up and bring them into my storm and just woo. And they would dread me coming home, because I would just let them have it. I'd go, look at all this mess on the floor. And David, why haven't you done the dishes? And look at all of this. And I've been at work all day. And now I've got to cook dinner. And and I recognized when I changed my behavior, it changed the behavior of the family. But the moment that I was in the shopping center, I was in Aldi trying to save money. Aldi, for anyone who doesn't know, watching this video, is like a very budget place to get your food. And trying to manage the kids. I had a toddler sitting in the little trolley, and my other son, who was just a little bit older but young, and they were pushing the trolley around and jostling, and I'm trying to focus on the shopping. And my son jumped off the trolley, and it just sort of moved and rolled into this man's leg. And I could see him giving me a daggers. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, did my trolley hit you? Did my son knock you? Is everything okay? And he just gave me the filthiest look, and he said, you can't control your kids. Your kids deserve a good slap in the face. You're a useless mother. Control your children. And so I was unnerved by that. And they were still running amok. And then my toddler son picked up a bottle of soda or something, and he threw it on the floor having a tantrum, and it spun around like this on the floor. And that's when I just heard, that's it. But I can't do this. I can't function as a parent. I can't organize myself. I'm stressed at work. It's all too much. Yeah, that was where it hit. Absolute rock bottom for me.
Yeah,
and
and then when you realize there's so many things need to be changed, there's something so wrong, the way kind of I operate, or and it's like, yeah.
I think it was having the public, I already felt lousy in myself, but then having a public person publicly say to a stranger, say to me, you're hopeless, and criticize just one area of my life that I was trying to have in control, because I was trying to control every area of my life. It was enough to send me over. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good reminder. And we need help quite often to manage our stress and time management. The question I was going to ask you, we talk, my women, we talk a lot about sleep, and they want to sleep well, and stress, it quite often comes number one, why they can't sleep. So why do you think that because when we are stressed, we can't sleep?
Because it comes down to that primal response, the fight or flight response, in that when we, as a species, as an animal species, for us to survive in our pack, we need to look out for threats. We need to see if there is a fire or a predator that's going to jump out of the bush and eat us. So we need to be on guard in order to stay alive. That's an animal response that we have. And for the primal part of our brain that responds to those threats is still very primal. It's not the higher functioning part of our brain. And so what happens is that it's called the amygdala in the brain. And if we have a threat to our well-being, the amygdala will fire off. So a threat to our well-being today in the modern world will be a flat tire on the freeway, losing our purse or our wallet, not being able to connect to the internet when we desperately need to, your toddler throwing a bottle of soda on the floor and you're going to be criticized publicly. They are all threats to our well-being. And so what happens is the amygdala sends out hormones that are designed for us to respond in those threatening situations, like if we were going to run from a predator. So it's pumping hormones into our system to make sure we stay alert, that our muscles are going to function, that we can run or that we can fight. And everything that we don't need to work in that time is going to shut down. If we're fighting a predator, we don't need to digest food, we don't need to reproduce, and we don't need to sleep. So the problem is, in terms of stress, is that it's just little pumps of cortisol that come into our system throughout the day. And if our brain does not recognize there are no more threats anymore, there are no threats, you are safe, you are in your cave, nothing's going to get you or eat you, that's when the amygdala will stop firing out those hormones. But if there's a constant flood of that stress hormone in our system, then it's harder for us to sleep. We're in that constant battle mode, even when we're sleeping. And a telltale sign is to wake up feeling tired, like you're not fully rested.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even I find working with women who find it hard to fall asleep and sleep through the night because of stress, and sometimes because they live for so long with stress. Now sometimes even they don't realize where it comes from. It just kind of, they know it just sits there like anxiety, stress, but why, where does it come from? Because it's been all the time being high on cortisol, and not learning to kind of realize kind of that's where it comes from, that's how I feel because I was thinking or stressed about that thing. So if you don't do kind of your work, recognizing where it comes from, why do you feel like that, then it's really hard then to put some strategies into place if you haven't learned to identify that where it comes from and what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a key point, is to, and that's the work that I do with people, is to identify those triggers. And the trap that we all experience in this modern world is what I call the benchmark of tolerable stress. So what's normal and okay and acceptable might sit down here, but it creeps up. That it's like a tide mark that creeps up. And so suddenly the benchmark of what's normal to us, of a stress level, is way up here, because it's like that all the time. The
Yep.
benchmark of acceptable stress suddenly rises. So when people say that they don't know where the stress is coming from or what's triggering them, I suspect quite often that tidal mark of acceptable stress has risen because they're always stressed and operating at that high level all the time. They don't know. There's no tip of the scale. There's no needle moving because the needle's going
Barometer saying
like
yes,
this all the
yes, yeah,
time. Yeah.
yes. Actually, I just thought of this example that I use it quite often, and I thought it was just so helpful to show the level of stress you can tolerate. Like if you show half a glass of water, and you would say how heavy it is, or how long you can hold it. And like if you hold it only for a short period of times, that's fine. But if you hold that, even the same half a glass, for a very long time, that's very tiring, that your hand starts really sore, because it's just you're holding it for a very long time, even it doesn't seem too much, but because you are holding it for a long time. The same with the stress. If you're carrying the stress for a long time, just wears you all your systems, affect impacts your sleep, and the whole, yeah, mental health, our relationships and everything. So just as you're saying, because if you're carrying on for a long time with stress, that it's plays detrimental
I
impact.
know for me too, I know a telltale sign of when I'm stressed or my workload is stressing me is when I'm dreaming that I'm working. When I start to do that, that's a real flag for me that
Mm-hmm.
that I'm stressed. Because the other thing too is that when I dream that I'm working, can you imagine? It's like I get up and go, "Oh, I've just done 8 hours of work. Wow." That's what it feels
Yeah,
like. I haven't had a break from it. My brain is still processing and working in a
yeah,
time when it should be downloading and exploring and fighting demons. And yeah.
yeah, and resting it. Yeah.
Mm.
Um. So yes, I'd love to hear some of your amazing tips on busy women, how to manage. Maybe let's have a look about first how to manage their time, and then maybe how to manage and minimize their stress. So most women, obviously, as we're just talking, you've got children, you've got busy work, you've got other responsibilities, and managing their time is sometimes it's very hard.
Yeah, it is. I think when you've got, when it becomes more challenging is when you've got so many different things to deal with, having to switch between them all the time. That can be when it gets, I think it's most challenging. You know, switching from a job, switching to parenting, or if you've got aged parents, or you've got a side job and your business, or just switching from all of those things. And typically, in terms of time management, that's what I find is that people are dividing themselves. It's like the saying, spreading yourself too thin. But I'll ask people, it's an interesting exercise, and I challenge you and all of your members to do this, is to go stop and take stock of how many email accounts do you have? So how many do you have at home? How many do you have at work that you have to monitor? How many phones do you have to answer? Do you have a landline? Do you have a mobile? Some people have two mobiles, one for home and one for work. They still have a phone on their desk that they need to answer as well. How many notebooks do you have? How many calendars or diaries do you have? Do you have a diary on your screen? Do you have a diary on your desk? Do you have a calendar on your wall at home? How many different places? So basically what we're looking at is, where is all the information coming in, and how many different places do you have to check constantly for information to go, what am I doing today?
Yeah.
What do I need to attend to? Yeah. And the more there is, the more divided it's like, the more balls you've got throwing in the air that you have to keep your eye on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still try to stick to one calendar and one diary that I've got, and still enjoy
Awesome.
writing by hand my appointments with the clients and any other maybe with my son's school interviews this Tuesday, or like once I've got it written by hand, it just almost like stayed in my head better than it just having all the Google calendars and everything else. Yep.
I guess it's about finding, there's nothing wrong with having paper systems.
No.
And certainly people I work with, some people prefer that. It does make things a little bit slower, and sometimes you have to replicate information. But for some people, they're still very comfortable operating in that space. And yes, writing things down really helps to hardwire things into your brain. It's part of the creating what's called the synapses, the connection. It's like you're wearing a path down. Yeah, so writing things down actually solidifies things much more. So when I do workshops and training with people, I get them to write things down, and I'll say, write it down, even if you know it already, even if you think you'll remember it, even if I'm teaching you something you already know, we want it to come back up to the surface and be there all the time, not something that you've forgotten about. Mm-hmm. So even if you know it already, write it down, scribble, underline, draw pictures, because it does help you to hardwire your brain in doing that.
And it just hand-brain connection as well. I just kind of hardwiring. Any other practical tips maybe on time management? I'll just turn on my light here.
I guess if I, in a nutshell, in terms of a practical approach that people can take with time management, is to focus on, in a business world, we say, how do you get the biggest bang for buck? Where can you make the most amount of money for the least amount of cost or expense or resource or time? So I would say to people on a personal level, go, how much effort did it take me? How much did it cost me in the sense of mental energy, time, resource, and how worthwhile was it? Like, what was the value in it for me? And so that helps to understand, where you focus your attention and prioritize the things. So that's a really simple way to start in terms of managing your time.
It's interesting you kind of mentioned that, because I started realizing myself when and with other people, using the best time when you have most energy for most kind of consume or they're consuming your mental energy, or it depends what you're doing at the time, just prioritizing if you need something more to be focused and sharp. When do you think during the day are those times when you can schedule that time for doing those tasks? But when you maybe, some of you maybe, or some people are not so sharp or more tired in the morning, what kind of a bit more admin work or other not so creative work you're going to kind of knowing yourself? So I'm just noticing and working on that myself. Then when I'm more sharp, maybe doing writing, and when I have more ideas and being creative, and I could do that, but more like quick, not doesn't involve too much mental strength. Well, some quick emails replies or something like that, and it, yeah, knowing what the
Yeah,
time of the day.
it's what I call energy mapping. So actually mapping out where your energy sits, just give a little scale, engaging where your energy is throughout the day. Probably my worst time for me is straight after lunch. I tend to slow down and
Mm-hmm.
not function properly. Sometimes first thing in the morning for me when I'm first starting out, I need to warm my brain up.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to do some menial things that kind of get me into the swing, get my brain worked up and moving. So yeah, mapping your energy is incredibly powerful, and I think it's worthwhile having a list of things that you need to do that are menial work. They're useful, they're valuable, but they don't require a lot of mental energy. And it could be
Mm-hmm.
things that it might be filing, or it might be scanning some documents, or just some things that don't require a lot of processing. If you have a list of those things that you can do, um, emptying out your inbox, any of those things can be helpful in those moments, in
Yes.
those down
Mm-hmm.
times. Yeah. The interesting thing is people often make the mistake of going, when they've got really powerful brain energy, that's when they need to be focusing on the really important things in their business. But in actual fact, when you've got when you're really on fire and got really sharp brain energy, that's when you should be working on the really difficult things, the
Mm-hmm.
things that need your brain to process them, that really
Yeah.
need to be nutted out. That's prime quality thinking time. So you need that for
Mm-hmm.
your hardest problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Problem solving. Brilliant. Yep. I like that. Let's talk a bit about stress and managing our stress as well. What's some of the tips your go tips that you will suggest, even without knowing personal situations? Quite often, once you know a bit more the background, why there is stress and how to deal with that, then easier to deal. And quite often I say just brainstorming, what can you do about that, the situation, what is making you stressed, things that you can do, that you can just work out the solution. But what you can't do is just learning to leave things and not preoccupy yourself with them. But quite often we are so focused on what things that we can't do that that's when stress levels go high.
Yeah, stress, people often make the mistake that, or they seek out to be stress free. But the interesting thing is that stress does serve us, like stress is important. We do need stress to function. So, for example, me speaking to you right now and you talking to me, we're probably in a state of stress, and we need to be able to think clearly, to
Mm-hmm.
concentrate. We're putting ourselves, there's a little pump of adrenaline to keep our mind alert and focused. If we were completely relaxed and calm, we'd be going, what did you say? Oh, yeah, yeah. If we were in a stress-free
Yeah.
state. Going to the gym is putting your body under stress. When we exercise, we need to have stress. So the key is to be able to identify when is stress useful and how can we allow it to work for us and not take over, not take control, and what can we do to counteract the stress. So when we've got all these stress hormones pumping into our system, we need to slow them down and then counteract that with some positive inducing hormones like dopamines and oxytocin and serotonin. They're all feel-good hormones that come into our system. And it's not complex. People often make the mistake that managing stress needs to be really sophisticated and complex, because stress can be big and overwhelming. So you think the solution has to be big and overwhelming. But the key is just to do small things consistently. The tool that you've demonstrated in terms of, I call it a pros and cons list, is one of the things that you can do. Is what are the benefits of these situations? What are the negatives in terms of struggling with a decision or taking a course of action? What are the solutions? One of my favorite tools as well is really focusing on the serenity prayer, which was made famous by Alcoholics Anonymous. And I never remember it off by heart, but it's basically something like, God, give me the
Strength
ability
to accept things that I can't change.
It's about
and
knowing the control, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So focusing on what's within your control and really going strong with that and being confident and strong with the things that are within your control, and not allowing the things that are beyond your control, which is exactly what you're talking about. Making a list of, okay, what can I do? What are the options and the solutions that are open to me? But one of the best tools in terms
quite often when we know what we can do about it, we reassure ourselves, reassure kind of our brain and everything that it's okay. I know what to do about it, in control. So there's no need to worry or panic about that, because we kind of worked out some solutions about that. So it's so much reassuring for yourself then, rather than not knowing at all what to do about that.
Because the anxiety, when you have no solution, the anxiety increases, and that it all goes hand in hand in terms of that stress response. Because once again, your amygdala is going, there is a threat to our well-being, something's at risk here. And that's where the anxiety is about the unknown. What if this happens and I don't know what's going to happen in this situation? What do I do with this? And how do I deal with that? All of those unknowns are a threat. So you're right, in terms of being able to take control and coming up with a plan, it eases off the anxiety, because it also eases off the amygdala. The amygdala goes, oh, okay, everything's under control here. There's no threats here. There's no predators that are going to eat. So the other thing too that is always underrated as a stress response, it's so simple, but because it's so simple, it's undervalued and underappreciated, is breath work. Breath is, and I'm sure you do this too with people with sleeping.
All the time. It's either a daytime, it's just one of the relaxations when you have a stressful day. Set up even 5-10 minutes to 20 minutes. And even in the morning, if you have to rush morning a little bit in bed, and at night when you kind of sleep, it just so calms you down, your nervous parasympathetic system, that it's just takes
so forcing yourself to, we have the autonomic nervous system in our body is the body's automatic way of keeping us going and keeping us alive. And breath is one of the few things that we can actually control. Everything else is a natural response, but breath we can control in terms of the pace and how deeply we breathe. So it is quite a powerful tool in that sense. And my tool, my recommendation to people is to remember to breathe. See, I'm in a stress response, so I'm going, you see, my breath's going like this, and so it's making me burp. If you remember to breathe low and slow, Just
Mm-hmm.
all you have to remember in those stressful moments is low and slow.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
good. Yep.
and so what you're doing is getting the breath as low into your belly as you possibly can and slowing it down. And the tip I use is to put my hands on my belly.
Yeah.
And when I can feel my hands going in and out, then I know that I'm breathing deeply and slowly.
Yeah.
When we do that, it releases dopamines and
Mm-hmm.
slows down the cortisol. And also the diaphragm moving so deeply massages our vagus nerve.
Mm-hmm.
And when the vagus nerve is stimulated, then the body knows that there is no stress response. It's when the vagus nerve stops getting stimuli that the body goes into a stress response. And the vagus nerve sends vital information it runs right down our spine, and it sends vital information to all of our organs, so to our heart, our brain. It sends oxygen and sends signals. So when the vagus nerve is not stimulated, we're in a stress response. So breath is so easy to
And it's
stimulate.
interesting, yeah. Breath, it's something it's the first thing a person is a little baby is born with, and the last thing that person is losing is his breath. So it's always with us. It's a vital part of our life. So it's kind of, and we can, as you said, you can control. So it's such a amazing tool we have, and always with us, always handy. Yeah.
And when we're in a stress response, our brains is consuming so much energy, and the amygdala is shutting out what we don't need. And that's why we often do stupid things when we're stressed, because the brain has to put all of its focus and intention into the threat, so it stops making necessarily rational and reasonable decisions. That's why people make silly mistakes when they're really stressed sometimes, or not able to remember things, or not focusing because they're in everything gets shut down. Part of the deep breath also is with stimulating that vagus nerve to trigger all the wires and signals going off, but also the oxygen to the brain.
That's right.
Which is vital. Wow. You know that too, for sleep. It's vital to stimulate the response and to get it functioning properly.
And for our brain,
yeah.
So vital. Yeah. So thank you. I think they're amazing tips, and so much kind of we can practice and we can learn, and it's something that we always can get more comfortable with that. You never kind of reach to the point and think, oh, there's nothing else I probably can worry about or get stressed about. It's just something always we can work on, and different stages of life bring different stresses or different factors that can bring stress. But I like also we watched you recommended watching that TED talk that making stress as your friend. So when you look at stress from a positive perspective, that it can be your friend and it can help you actually, then it's that perspective even already makes such a huge change to your brain and to your organs and supply of your oxygen and everything.
Yeah, that was the Kelly McGonigal TED talk, Make Stress Your Friend. And that's all that research that's done to show that changing the way you think about stress changes the way your body responds and puts you into a different state. So rather than being fearful and anxious, it puts you into a state of, your body actually goes into a state of courage and joy, like your blood vessels change, your heart, the hormones change, everything changes just by changing the way you think. Yeah.
I mean, our thoughts are so powerful. I realize, when I work with women, I realize how important it's just, especially for sleep, changing the way you think and reshaping your thinking. And
Yes.
So thank you, Barbara. I think it was amazing just hearing your story, but also all these very practical tips how to manage time and manage stress. And if people want to reach you, how can they find you?
So you can, if you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook, Barbara Clifford, but otherwise you can go to my website, timetamer.com.au. There's lots of resources and information on there as well.
I'm going to post the link to your website under the this video, and as well as your freebie for us. So thank you for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
All right. See you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lana.